Before this video starts, I just want to say that I tried my best to find the answers to the most mysterious questions or happenings related to the unknown as best I can. Some answers to questions are questions, and some on top of theories. I do want to state that these are all just theories and curious questions. I may seem like I'm not going anywhere with what I'm trying to find out or missing some things related to lore, but slowly I start getting on track with what's going on. At least I hope so. Almost like a real life investigation. All in all, please just bear with me. A theory is a theory. Nothing I'm saying here is completely confirmed, and if I'm wrong about something, I'm wrong. Though I did read the lore of the unknown when it first released, I didn't connect the dots as in depth, I feel, and I didn't fully understand what's happening. I feel the same way about other characters' lore after having to revisit them just to get an understanding of what's going on. You'll kinda see that in this video since I was just brainstorming about possible outcomes and questions on the fly, but I do start to get a clearer understanding of things. At least I hope so. Unknown is definitely a character I want to dig deeper into and know as much as there is to know as possible. The video gets straight to the point and is littered with questions, theories, and lore quotes. I'm already thinking about planning a part 2 for this video since I'm pretty sure there's many questions and theories related to the unknown and its lore. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoy the video. Some add-on descriptions depict strange happenings that were caused by people who suddenly lost their minds or might have already been crazy. This gives me the idea that UVX was maybe responsible for people losing their minds or maybe just encountering the unknown in general. For example, the punctured eyeball add-on description explains that officers in the police station had turned on one another for some odd reason. Maybe this was somehow UVX's doing, since it's involved in the unknown's lore. If that is the case, I wonder how exactly the unknown did this without being seen. Since by the description of the add-on, it seems like it's from a third-person point of view. The officers suddenly went crazy and started turning on one another. I mean, this also could have been connected to the sketch attempt add-on, which describes the victim's child was given paper and crayons at the station while he waited for his father to pick him up. So maybe just even the picture of the unknown is able to drive people insane, since that still is presence there. It will explain how the officers just went crazy. Front page article add-on explains the assailant who tore gaping holes through a cabin and drove a family into the woods. Again, for what reason? Did this assailant see the unknown? Was this assailant exposed to UVX? I would like to further elaborate that maybe victims thought the unknown was a serial killer and the assailant described here is actually the unknown, since the unknown technically forms into what you believe unknown is personally. What gets to me about this assailant actually being unknown itself is that why would it drive to the woods instead of just consuming the victims on the spot? Taking victims to a specific location adds a sense of style, code, or flair to the killings. And since this is involved with unknown's lore, I believe this assailant may have gone crazy because of unknown's doing somehow. Homemade mask add-on I feel a similar way about. It explains the unknown mask killer who made a mask in his shed in the backyard where he would bring others when the sun went down. What if unknown was the cause behind this as well? Or this was maybe unknown itself due to how victims perceived unknown? I mean, it only makes sense for a handful of different tragic outcomes to happen if everyone perceives a similar threat, that being the unknown, as something unique to their own view of it. But again, if this was unknown, why wouldn't unknown just kill them off on the spot? These add-ons don't have much context at all, so it makes it difficult to pick apart what exactly is going on in the descriptions of them. However, what I would like to add is this. Some talked about a top secret government research program run by the Office of Strategic Services in the 1950s, Project Apple Pie, mind control experiments using hallucinogenic drugs. Now, isn't that technically part of what UVX is? Hallucinogenic drugs? I do believe that there is more to UVX, it's literally a part of the unknown, and we don't even know where unknown originated from. So how can we really know what UVX is truly capable of? But what do you guys believe? The OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services, apparently might have been responsible for unknown's origin, or at least that's how it's made out to be in some way. Now, I genuinely don't believe that the OSS was responsible for unknown because in the lore it states that the OSS was dated back in the 50s, maybe even the 40s if you include this Undone Perk quote that states, erratic behavior in machinery could be related to Redacted, further testing required, OSS report, December 2nd, 1943. So I'm assuming that these time frames are apparently the dates when they were experimenting with hallucinogenic drugs. We know it's the 50s because it's stated in the lore, but I guess it might have also been the 40s. We don't know exactly when they started doing this, but from these dates it seems like they already were experimenting. And judging from Unknown's lore, even when Unknown states that it lived in dungeons long forgotten,
I lived in dungeons long forgotten,
makes me interpret that Unknown was always here since ever. Maybe even the birth of mankind from a dark place. When there's good, there's evil, right? Yin and yang. So what if the Unknown is just one of those many evils? Maybe something like a sentient evil, one that we can't comprehend. Sentient meaning having the ability to feel, sense, or perceive. I like to think the OSS happened to obtain some evidence about the Unknown's existence. 2 pieces of evidence being a device with undisclosed origin and a serum vial, which explains in the description, the molecular structure of the substance was synthesized in the lab, but its effects could never be replicated. The substance I would assume is UVX because it definitely sounds like it could be. Nothing is technically confirmed in Unknown's lore, which is why I'm not confirming anything that was blatantly obvious already. Hell, even the things we think may be blatantly obvious can be a red herring to throw you off. You never know. But anyways, like I was saying about the OSS recovering evidence related to Unknown's existence, it stated in the power description that some believed a specimen was recovered by the military for their experiments, the codename Unknown Venom X. Maybe the OSS started to gather their own hypothesis towards what is possibly out there and what they have found. They conducted experiments on various people at various locations like movie theaters, hospitals, etc., possibly using UVX to manipulate them or perform whatever is capable of doing, like possibly making people disappear. Since it states here in the late 1950s, several college students mysteriously disappeared from a movie theater. Witnesses saw them go inside. Some remember seeing them in their seats, but when the lights came up, they were gone. No one saw them leave. No trace of them was ever found. A projectionist claimed to have heard voices in the empty darkness of the theater later that night, but when he turned on the lights, no one was there. Then in the 1960s, a group of teens disappeared while exploring an abandoned hospital believed to be haunted. To add to this point, in the Unknown's B-movie poster add-on, it states that the movie was rumored to be state-funded propaganda made specifically for something called Project Apple Pie. However, what bugs me about this is that it's hard to piece together what exactly happened, since it's vaguely explained in the lore. Because from what it sounds like, it almost sounds like Unknown was literally there in the theater with the college students, since it states the projectionist heard voices in the empty dark theater, but it's difficult to decipher if that was Unknown, UVX, or even something else entirely. Maybe the voices of the people that disappeared? Could the effects of UVX make people hear voices? We know in game it can make survivors hear Unknown's voice perfectly mimicking another human, rather than sounding pretty distorted when survivors aren't weakened by UVX.
Sorry. Is this yours? Have you seen my dog?
They don't make what exactly happened in the theater clear on purpose, but what we do know is that there is definitely something wrong with that theater because Sable visited that same theater. This was this exact same theater where another incident happened involving characters explained in Sable's lore. Those characters being Elias, Elon, and Ellen. In Sable's lore, it states that feeling close to an answer, she continued her research and discovered 2 teenage brothers had recently disappeared from the theater, Elias and Elon. The only witness, their youngest sister, Ellen, was committed to an institution after ripping her eyes out, and so pretending to be a relative, Sable went to talk to Ellen, who admitted she and her brothers had been trying to steal old movie posters from the storage room behind the movie screen. She then described a secret door in the basement and the passageway that led to another place, a dark place, a cold place, an evil place. Stay away from there, she begged. Stay away. So this piece of lore gives me the idea that what if this was part of the OSS experiments, which had been dated a long time ago, that they wanted people to forget about? What if parts of their experience went wrong and did something to that theater which opened up a dark passageway? This makes me think if this was even really the OSS or something else entirely that's only hinted about but not explained in lore. I mean, the OSS are the only ones linked to sketchy movie theaters after all, right? I mean, it is this piece of evidence from Sable's lore which explains that, quote, investigating further, she discovered the theater was built over the ruins of an old one-room schoolhouse that had been burned to the ground in the 1920s. Maybe that has something to do with that, unless that just happened to be a legit accident. I have no idea. If UVX specifically was the reason as to why those teenagers and students disappeared, that means that it wasn't Unknown but part of it, if that makes sense. If this is the case, I would question how exactly they made the UEX work without a known being there to make it work, if you get where I'm going with that. Like, how exactly did they extract the UEX and make it work against people without a known's doing, if that was the case? But is UEX even capable of dark passageways that leads to some evil abyss? That's what rubs me the wrong way about a known being literally present in the theory specifically, because I think there might be more to what happened and much more complex than UEX particularly being the cause of the disappearances. Sable was last heard of in her lore going down a dark passageway, which Ellen told her not to go. It states here that she pushed and shoved the door open to reveal an endless circuit stairway descending into perfect darkness. Using the pen light to navigate, she descended for 10 minutes before she noticed a cold, black fog rising from the lower depths. This really makes me question if the OSS was instead responsible for Sable coming to the realm, and if they maybe had something linked to the entity, because the theater was Sable's last known location from our eyes, and the OSS was responsible for conducting experiments in theaters. Makes me question if a known even had any part of what happened in the theaters in general. In the known's lore, it explains that many believe these unethical experiments opened doorways to other dimensions which allowed evil things to enter the world. I find this piece of the lore so confusing because it doesn't give insight to what happened, and it's not even specific enough, which of course is completely done on purpose. Could these doorways to other dimensions be the cause of why so many people went missing? Why Ellen ripped her eyes out? How was she the only one that didn't disappear, by the way? Made Sable enter the trials? It speaks of evil things entering the world too, so I could definitely see in the future another killer who was somehow associated with the OSS and was one of the evil things that entered the world. The entity is probably just waiting to grab whatever abomination that appears to be, maybe. Like I said, I don't believe the OSS was completely responsible for the unknown, but they became involved with the unknown instead. The unknown been existed with unknown origin, they just happened to find out about it and uncover evidence which they use to conduct experiments. Maybe. Cause I feel like the OSS knows more than what is described. I mean, it's mildly damning evidence of the OSS finding out about unknown, like it keeps showing redacted, which means to censor or obscure for legal or security purposes, even removing sensitive information. It makes sense that evidence involving the unknown and what the OSS did to experiment on people would be confidential and not talked about, since that is indeed sensitive information that may get someone killed just talking about it, since it interferes with the unknown. But then again, that could have been their plan all along. If this is the case, however, I do question what possibly happened to these researchers or scientists who were aware about unknown. I assume they may have been killed by it. It states here in the unknown's lore that most of the records were destroyed in the 70s, records involving Project Apple Pie, which we know was mind control experiments using hallucinogenic drugs. It's funny how it even mentions this in the iridescent OSS report add-on. It states the report was redacted to the point of being meaningless, but still theorists tried to extract meaning from it. The theorists would be us trying to uncover what exactly was on the OSS report. The theorists are really the people who die in attempts of trying to investigate the unknown, since investigating it immediately invites death. But hey, at least we don't die, right? Anywho, what exactly were the OSS doing? What incidents happened that had to be redacted? And what have they done involving the unknown? We may theorize, but I believe it will always remain a mystery. Or would it? So there's a part in Sable's lore that explains that the town of Greenville was built over a fracture. A fracture being an overlap between worlds. In her lore it states this. She often talked about that history on her show, and she formed a theory that the uncanny sightings and disappearances were somehow linked to the town's history. One caller suggested the town was built on top of a fracture. The caller went on to describe a fracture as an overlap between worlds. Another caller said fractures were created by an ancient cult devoted to forgotten demons. Another caller defined fractures as a cosmic buffet for an elder god that fed on pain, fear, and misery. And one caller even argued that it wasn't a fracture but the unknown, a mysterious creature that consumed anyone who dared to imagine it. Now, what I happen to notice about the callers theorizing about the fracture beneath the town is that all their theories seem to add up, actually make sense, and are very familiar. Like, I think all the callers are right in some way about the fracture. The first caller said it's an overlap between worlds, which is maybe the case considering where did Elias and Elon disappear to when investigating the dark passageway behind the movie theater. Future survivors coming to DVD, Sable went down there too, which landed her in the trials. Greenville and Garden of Joy, which I will get to in a second, are considered an overlap between worlds. That's why you see those floating structures in the sky and whatnot in both maps. The void from the Haunted by Daylight event even has the same vibe. The next caller said the fracture was created by an ancient cult devoted to forgotten demons. The following caller said it's a cosmic buffet for an elder god that fed on pain, fear, and misery. Now, by the looks of it, It sounds like both of these callers made a connection to the Dredge's lore, which would make sense. It states here in the Dredge's lore that as the Guardians held the trembling woman, she screamed that Otto wasn't the savior he claimed to be. He belonged to an ancient cult, an exclusive club of billionaires that took pleasure in corrupting and sacrificing people, towns, and even countries to an elder god. Did Otto's ancient cult happen to be the exact same ancient cult behind the fractures that the caller was talking about? I mean, they were on some Court of Owls shit, right? They were filthy rich, which means they may have had access to highly confidential things. So I believe they had higher power and possibly being involved with the fractures. Also notice how the caller mentioned forgotten demons when talking about the ancient cult. It's funny how Unknown also says in the lobby, I lived in dungeons long forgotten. It's just crazy how these connections could possibly add up and is maybe trying to tell us something. It's like a complex ass riddle. When the other caller mentions that fractures are a cosmic buffet for an elder god that fed on pain, fear, and misery, that's literally the Dredge he's talking about. Dredge feeds on negative and dreadful energy like what was described. In his lore it states it was everywhere and nowhere at once as it slowly picked its way through the carnage, absorbing the darkness, savoring the misery, trilling terrible noises, shrieks, cries, whimpers, pops, cracks. Then the last caller says it's the Unknown. What I believe the caller was trying to state is that Unknown came from the overlap in a way, almost like it was literally birthed there in that dark place. To add to this point from Unknown's lore, it was talking about the OSS unethical experience which led to dimensions being open that invited evil things in. So in its entirety, this makes you question a handful of things as to what is happening with these fractures. Because if this really was the OSS experience that happened to open dark doorways, doesn't that possibly mean that the OSS was in cooperation with the ancient cult? The ancient cult apparently sacrificed sounds. Could that have been part of Greenville's history? And the reason the fracture is beneath the town? The Greenville Theater may be a direct doorway into different dark dimensions where people disappear and evil things erupt from. These dimensions lead to worlds that cannot be explained but hold unimaginable evil, places like the realm of the entity and beyond. To add to this point in Sable's lore, it states, but a strange black fog had taken Michaela during her performance, and Sable felt the icy hand of guilt grab her by the back of the neck. She was convinced that she had somehow sent Michaela to her doom. Did the Unknown take her? Did she try to define the Unknown? What about her roommate? Her roommate disappeared as well, but then she realized Michaela's story wasn't about the Unknown. It was about something else, another dimension. A dimension filled with terrifying creatures, sadistic killers, and endless horror. This was not the Unknown. So it would make sense if the realm of the entity is just one of those many places that anyone could disappear to if they willingly went through a dark doorway like Sable did. This doesn't mean it will always send them to the trials. It could be any other unknown dark place. If these people are lucky enough, they can maybe survive like Ellen did, but it may come with a sacrifice since we know she ripped her eyes out because of what she saw. Other than that though, the OSS even sacrificed people technically, since they were experimenting on unsuspecting civilians as stated in the lore. The ancient cult the Outer Stamper was a part of sacrificed people as well. What I'm trying to say here is that it's definitely similarities between the ancient cult and the OSS. Maybe they were working together or perhaps had a similar purpose. They don't explain that vividly. Maybe the OSS knew about the ancient cult knew about the OSS, or like I said, they just had some similarities. The funny thing about these two groups being connected too is that the Dredge and the Unknown have things in common as well. They both seem to have come from a very dark place. Both can manifest into what you imagine it to be, as stated here in Dredge's lore. Otto watched a creature as it slowly began to manifest into the very thing he had imagined, the very thing he made them all imagine. And both their maps seem to be connected since the outskirts of both the maps have structures and whatnot floating in the air. This all just doesn't seem like a coincidence to me, and I'm pretty sure when Dredge wasn't anticipating release during the 6th-year anniversary broadcast, they teased maps similar to that magnitude coming into the realm of the entity.
What's really cool about this new realm is that in the future we will be able to explore it again, but in other contexts than in the Dredge perfect town. So this realm is built from different memories, from different characters. And so we'll be able to explore different cities wrapped inside that same realm.
Which it did. So why not have both stories connect to one another in a stronger way? I'm pretty sure we're bound to see more evil things erupt from the dark place and into the realm of the entity. So we know that the OSS destroyed most records related to Project Apple Pie in the 70s. Which brings me to this next question. The people who happened to survive these experiments, if there even were people that survived, did the OSS use hypnotherapy to uncover what those victims saw? I only say this because in the Hypnosis Watch add-on, it states that hypnotherapy was recommended to recover repressed memories. What emerged from his mind would be his undoing. Whose mind? Who's he? We don't know, but maybe it could have been the victim who happened to see what they weren't supposed to see and the OSS hypnotized them for it. But if this is the case, how could they forget what they saw? We know that Ellen from Sable's Lord tore her eyes out from perhaps something she had seen in the theater, but we don't know exactly why and what gave her that instinct. Was it her own doing? Was she forced? We don't know. So to compare what happened with Ellen and this unknown person who received hypnotherapy, why was that the case? It mentions the person's repressed memories being his undoing, but why so dramatic? He must have seen something that's not comfortable to view, and the OSS extracted all that intel for their own security. At least that's my best guess. It still doesn't quite make sense to me that this actually was the case, because I doubt this person would forget what he saw unless the trauma and stress from what he did see left him speechless and unable to describe the horror that unfolded. Your guess is as good as mine for what's going down here, but damn man, who knows? It's so confusing to me. This one kind of stems back all the way from Unknown's origin and what it actually looked like at base instead of snatching the bodies and voices of people. Even in the default head cosmetic description, it states that nobody knows for sure what it looks like, but there are many theories. We know that it always had this otherworldly form to it, whether it takes the identity of an animal or human. But did it always look like this at base? We don't know. Who was his first ever victim? It had to have looked like something completely different before his uncanny form, because it's literally killing living things and taking their identity. In the default body cosmetic description, it states its otherworldly form would be the last thing his victims ever saw. What some people might not know about the Unknown is that its default cosmetic is Olivia's illustration of it. Unknown forms into what you perceive it to be. So when it states here in Unknown's lore that Olivia drew what she believed to be how Unknown looks like, for a moment Olivia wondered what would happen if one urban legend encountered another. She laughed at the idea and tempted fate by sketching the picture of what she thought the Unknown might look like. Then she pinned the sketch right in the middle of her evidence board, laughed nervously, and waited to be consumed by the Unknown for having tried to define it. Olivia was the last one to illustrate Unknown before it got taken into the realm of the entity, and Unknown horror filled Olivia's heart and left room for nothing else. She breathed deeply as cold sweat beaded on her forehead. She placed her hand on the doorknob. The lights turned off, but she could still hear the strangely inhuman cries. Then the lights turned back on, and she could see a strange black fog seeping through the bottom of the door. Hesitantly, Olivia creaked the door open to see a bulky shape with frenzied tentacles being pulled into a thick mask of fog, vanishing slowly into the darkness like a dying shadow. So what I like to believe about what Unknown possibly looked like that base, I think it may have looked like absolutely nothing. I believe it literally formed its otherworldly form from the beliefs of what people envisioned it to look like, or what people thought it was entirely. It took the shape of people's darkest fears and turned it into a manifestation of exactly that, according to each person individually. For example, think about Bird Box, right? If you've seen the movie, you've seen the movie. If not, it's on Netflix. But in Bird Box, what does the threat look like? It looks like nothing, right? It's really just the presence of it, but it can manipulate your mind by making you see personal traumatic experiences, lost loved ones. All in all, it feeds into your lowest low and makes you kill yourself if you look at it. For Unknown, I believe this was how it may have started out in a similar way, until it formed a body due to what people believed about it. But what I don't understand about the appearance part about Unknown is that why exactly does it look the way it looks? Like, sure, it could look otherworldly, but why does it look otherworldly in this way, if that makes sense? Like, why couldn't it look like a different otherworldly being instead of it looking like a being who mastered Twister? This isn't me complaining at all. I love Unknown's design. It's the best design in the game in my opinion. But why it's design, if that makes sense, you know? That's why I'm so curious to get valid origin backstory of the Unknown and how it came to be, but we'll never get that ever. It just defeats the whole purpose of the Unknown as a character, which I respect. It only makes sense for a being that doesn't want to be understood. I do have another theory which bleeds into the mystery of why Unknown looks the way it looks. Now, I don't know if it's a huge coincidence that Unknown happens to look like Dwight on every hard drug imaginable, but is this possible coincidence really a coincidence? I think the idea of this popular theory is creepy as hell, because we know who Dwight is. However, this isn't our Dwight. Not the Dwight we're familiar with, but Dwight from an alternate universe. However, what makes me question this theory being half coincidental is the fact that Olivia illustrated what she believed the unknown looked like. So did she accidentally coincidentally draw Doodle Bob Dwight? I doubt she knew a Dwight from her universe, because why would she think unknown looks like Dwight? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Part of me likes to believe that instead of unknown being Olivia's illustration entirely, unknown is somehow mocking the safety of survivors in general. I say this because in the lobby animation, unknown may be perceived as a regular person until you get a good look at it. Notice how it has its back turned until it snaps around and glances at the screen for a minute before flopping down to the ground and revealing this terrifying uncanny form in full display instead of hiding in the dark. What if that's supposed to make the survivors in game, not us as the players, question if that's the Dwight, because it somehow knows that the survivors know the Dwight. So it's doing this to deceive survivors for a second until it reveals it's not the Dwight they know. Thinking about it, it can obviously be to scare or deceive the player in a way too, since unknown is literally breaking the fourth wall. I mean, the unknown did somehow know Olivia's name, so I believe the unknown is much more intelligent than we may think. Imagine a survivor chilling by the campfire just like in the main menu lobby, but the Dwight isn't there, only for the survivors to look at a dark area distant from the campfire, only to see what they think is the Dwight just standing around in the dark until it reveals its true form. I mean, the killers are always looking at the survivors in the main menu lobby, right? If this really was the case though, what did Olivia's illustration of unknown look like if unknown did intentionally become the Dwight? This theory is confusing to think about. I don't know about my theory, if I'm being honest, maybe too forced, but I do like the idea of it. But I do, however, believe the theory about unknown being the Dwight might be a coincidence or half coincidence, because it still bugs me that if this did happen to be Dwight from an alternate universe, why did Olivia draw unknown to look just like Dwight? But then it's like even that could have been a coincidence, and this indeed is Dwight from an alternate universe. What do you guys think? I believe this one is quite simple and self-explanatory. I think what's happening when unknown Mori survivors is that it's literally taking survivors' essence and identity. This may be the way unknown is able to use different bodies and voices. I like to look at it almost like The Thing, you know? If you saw the movie, you saw the movie. But in The Thing assimilates the characters in the movie. Basically what this is the process of the thing taking over your body until it's able to form the perfect imitation of you. Take that knowledge and input it to unknown. Basically, I think that's what's happening in unknown's Mori. It's literally quote-unquote assimilating the survivors, but instead the unknown still has that uncanny otherworldly form while still having the appearance and voice of who it just quote-unquote assimilated. I'm actually pretty sure the devs took some inspiration from The Thing for the unknown. Peep how unknown's back looks. It's literally a mouth that opens with teeth, spilling out tentacles. Now look at this scene from The Thing. It's literally a mouth on a stomach with teeth, just like unknown's Mori. There's more to compare between the thing and the unknown, like their ominous nature, which leads me to believe they at least took some inspiration. But yeah, that's exactly what I believe is happening in the Mori. I could be wrong since barely anything is confirmed about unknown, but that's definitely my best guess. Sure, unknown could just be doing this to make survivors disappear for no evidence, but how else does it obtain the bodies of those it kills? There could be alternative ways, but I do think the Mori is the most common way. This theory comes from Reddit user The Heavy Claw, whose theory states that the unknown was actually taken by the entity accidentally. So here's this user's theory. So recently was looking through the unknown's lore and voice lines and noticed that in the lobby, his lines make so much sense if they are directed at the entity. Some interesting standouts are, "You must be lonely here, you give me the creeps, why so nervous tonight, no one will hurt you, no one but me." This implies unknown believes he can hurt the entity in some way, and also that the entity is nervous of him. This then led me to look back at the lore, and I think I cracked the code. Entity and unknown were both coincidentally targeting Olivia at the same time, and were unaware of each other. Unknown manifested just as the entity was trying to take her, and accidentally ended up taking unknown instead, explaining why it seemed freaked out as it was pulled into the fog. Now unknown seems almost amused with the entity, and the entity is nervous, which is a terrifying thought. I find this very interesting because what immediately caught my attention about this theory is that it's a theory within a theory. There's a popular theory around that you, the player, are the entity. All us players are the entity. Unknown is looking directly at the screen talking to you, the entity. I honestly thought a gnome was breaking the fourth wall, because it seems like it's trying to make you, the literal player, and not the entity, feel uncomfortable, but its voice lines would make sense toward the entity as well. When a gnome gets taken by the entity, a gnome puts up a fight and freaks out because it didn't willingly want to be taken by the entity. But what makes me curious about this is, if this was the case, I guess the entity just decided to take a gnome anyway, since it probably found it intriguing enough to fit in the trials. Cause why not snatch a gnome and Olivia at once? But I find it fair that I only snatched a gnome though. What makes me scratch my head and wonder if the entity was trying to take Olivia is this very strange ambiguous ending to a gnome's lore, where it states she wasn't sure what to do. Part of her wanted to run, but the other part of her wanted to know more. But as she considered what to do next, dozens of voices begin to call out to her with promises of the unknown and the impossible, and of unearthly things beyond human experience. So is she marked for death at this point? Or marked for trials, I should say? I mean, if you get pulled into the trials, you're already dead, right? So ours are technically in purgatory and would never go back to their past lives. Anyway though, the ending did not sound good at all for Olivia, cause sure, she was technically saved by the entity from a gnome, but it's like she channeled something. Maybe she made a connection between an overlap or something like that of that magnitude. I mean, like in the theater from when those college students disappeared, the projectionist did hear voices like if there were students in the theater present, which I'm assuming came from the overlap beneath the theater. It says here in Sable's lore that maybe, she mused, the Greenville disappearances didn't relate to the unknown, but some other darkness. For a moment, Olivia wondered what would happen if one urban legend encountered another. She laughed at the idea and tempted fate. Olivia was curious as to what would happen if two urban legends met, but what if there's a consequence to that? Maybe that consequence is her inevitably being pulled into the trials, or something else. Maybe these promises from dozens of voices begin to drive her insane, to the point she ends up being a potential killer with a unique ability. The ending to the lore sounds like a gift from the curse almost, because sure, she made the two legends meet, but it seems like there's more to her ending in particular that doesn't sound good for her. I want to see more of Olivia in the future, continuing exactly where the lore ended. It just sounds like there's more to be explained from exactly what happened. I find this theory pretty interesting because it makes you look at the ending of Unknown's lore in a different light, because it's not confirmed that the entity taking the known was even intentional, and the theory about the player being the entity just adds to the theory. But who knows, it could be a completely different reason as to why the entity snatched the unknown in the first place. Yes, I do believe we will eventually see tomes for Unknown. However, it will just be vague as hell. I feel tomes might give us a bit of a sense of direction for what's going on, a few faint hints, but nothing too revealing about Unknown's origin. Like I mentioned, it just kills the point of the character. It is interesting to think about what the tomes will reveal in general though. I believe it may show like no lore at all, but instead the POV of the victims the Unknown has killed, which is still cool in my opinion since you would be seeing cutscenes with the Unknown in it. Maybe it'll show a cutscene of when Olivia went to the motel to investigate the Unknown, and it shows Unknown being taken by the entity. Speaking of Unknown being taken by the entity, did people continue to disappear when they investigated the Unknown after the entity took it? I honestly don't know. What was the aftermath for all that since Unknown is present in the trials now? Maybe there's more than one Unknown? I don't know. It's interesting to think about. I'll personally love that the tome showed what exactly was behind the hidden door that was behind the movie screen in Greenville Theater that leads to some dark passageway. We know Sable went to explore it, which left off pretty ambiguously, and whatever Ellen saw made her rip her own eyes out. I think Ellen's POV from the incident would make for an interesting tome cutscene too. So I'm kind of curious as to what's down there if you keep going down. Like what exactly would you see? If they don't go that far in revealing anything like that in the tomes to leave it mysterious, then I guess the previous ideas I mentioned would be cool to see in the cutscene in my opinion. So what I forgot to mention about the overlaps and people losing their mind because of the effects of the overlaps is that Haddie had a connection to them. In Sable's lore, when Ellen's brothers, Elias and Elon, disappeared, that was a traumatic event for her which possibly made her lose her mind like that and see all these unimaginable things. I believe Ellen experienced what Haddie experiences from her lore after her parents died in an accident, except the experience was too overwhelming for Ellen. Haddie is more efficient at calming herself and silencing her mind as stated in the lore, which is why she didn't go crazy like Ellen did, who likely wasn't able to control it. Here in Haddie's lore it states, but the trauma of losing her parents seemed to unlock something within her. She began to see things nobody else could see. Horrible, unnatural, unexplainable things. Apparitions tormented her in class, at home, in bed. Her unexpected screams earned her the nickname Haddie, only adding to her alienation and anguish. Once a cheerful and social child, Haddie walled herself off to the world. This sounds exactly like what Ellen was going through. I also like to assume that the man in the Hypnosis Watch add-on experienced the same thing, and the OSS wanted to recover that from his mind, but it still kind of sounds like he didn't remember what happened to him, which is why his memories are repressed. I don't know, I'm just oddly curious about the context of the add-on. I like to also theorize if Olivia now has a similar gift like Haddie, or if she freaked out like Ellen, since we don't know the aftermath of Unknown's lore. Olivia experiencing Unknown getting taken by the entity would be a terrifyingly dramatic event, and that's maybe the reason why she starts hearing voices promising bizarre things. In Haddie's lore before the All Things Wicked chapter even released, it explained overlaps and the effects it can have on people who get affected by them. It states here that with time, Haddie realized her uncanny abilities only triggered in certain areas, dark areas. It was as though there were places in the world where another dimension somehow bled into our own. Jordan called these intersecting areas overlaps, and they seem to give Haddie insight into a dark, shadowy world straight out of a cosmic horror story. It's cool to see stories have a potential connection with one another, which makes those stories all the more interesting. Makes me confident that we definitely see more overlap maps in the future. I'm curious how they will have those new chapters stories that happen to mention the overlap be connected to Unknown's lore possibly, since it's heavily hinted that overlaps are mysterious doorways into dark dimensions, where those dimensions bleed into our own. What do you guys think of Haddie's lore being an interesting connection to the Unknown and Sable's lore, which we know also ties into Dredge's lore? It's just crazy how they're all connected in this suspenseful way. A YouTuber by the name of Azimos made a great video a while ago explaining the mystery of the Unknown. I mentioned in his video because he has convincing theories and points about the true nature of the Unknown and where it possibly came from that I found very interesting. He goes deep into the nitty gritty, and I highly recommend you guys check out his video on Unknown if you haven't seen it already. I don't want to spoil anything he said in the video, so I prefer watching it, but basically his theory about what the Unknown is and where it came from I find really intriguing and is definitely worth watching. Link is down in the description below. That's what wraps up the many questions and theories I have for the Unknown. Some of the theories I feel are a bit forced, but they do make you question if something could have been the case. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I might make a part 2 to this since there are many unknown questions and theories that are interesting out there and would be fun to possibly uncover. There's also the Unknown film sequel video I'm working on following the video I made around Halloween about what an Unknown film would look like. But how do you guys feel about some of these questions and theories involving the Unknown? Is it too much? Do you guys feel it makes sense? Do I belong in a straitjacket? Let me know down below. Love y'all. Take care. I'm gonna see y'all in the next one. And peace.